Tonight we're here really to see a great body of work reviewed and discussed in a tribute to one of the real masters, one of the singular figures in the history of American filmmaking. I feel that I literally grew up, or perhaps didn't grow up, watching the films of Robert Altman. In a medium that often seems so anonymous, there was no mistaking a film made by Bob Altman, be it MASH or California Split, Popeye, or more recently Secret Honor. You could tell you were watching a Bob Altman film. He's continuing, if you've read about or seen, this kind of filmmaking, doing what he did in the 70s and 80s, now into the 1990s, with a remarkable new feature that will simply make a lot of people who perhaps hadn't experienced his work before able to now get that sense of this singular sense of how to capture our time, our culture, what concerns us, and what film can deliver for us, a fairly intelligent, engaged, film-going public. Talking with Bob tonight is one of the foremost film scholars in this country, a man who's authored a number of major works on film history. He's the co-author of the leading textbook, the bestseller of the Intro to Film Text, one that we use at the University of Minnesota. He's also a longtime friend of mine whose work I've seen and read and thought about and pondered, one of the most articulate writers not only on American cinema but on Japanese cinema, Western European cinema. David Bordwell is and has been the kind of center of a major film studies department at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He has the Jacques Ledoux Chair of Film Studies there and has been here a number of times, though I'm afraid it's been more on the order of about 8 years since he's last been here to engage in a program. 12 years ago, he was on this very stage with a filmmaker of some import, one Jean-Luc Godard. So it's been almost a dozen years since between his dialogues for The Walker. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome David back here, and especially to welcome our honoree of a MacArthur Dialogue, Robert Altman.
Thank you. What's going on here? We heard all this laughing and noise out here, and I thought, well, this must be where they're doing the Rosanna Bar. I'm not going to be that funny, but I'll be obscene.
At least as good. Well, we could go into a lot of preliminaries. This year, I think there's a lot to remind us of Robert Altman's work. You hear about the popularity or the new popularity of country and Western music, and a lot of us think of Nashville. And you hear about a presidential campaign in New Hampshire, and a lot of us think about Tanner 88. And and you always hear about Richard Nixon, and some of us think about Secret Honor. And in general, I think, as Bruce said, Robert Altman's films are sort of part of our cultural experience. They're part of our collective memory of the last 20 years. And so what we thought we'd do tonight is actually not reconstruct exactly, but take a sort of quick trip through those 20 years, looking at several extracts from Bob Altman's films and talking with him and trying to get some sense of how this career of this American maverick, as we called him in this series, has changed and progressed. So let me just start, and you'll find that many of my questions will seem dumb compared to his answers, but I'm here to play Abbott to his Costello, or whatever you like, and so I'll start. One thing we did talk briefly about, Bob, was the extent to which your work in commercial filmmaking and in industrial films and in TV really sort of preceded your feature filmmaking. And a film like The Player, you might think was made by someone who's very much an outsider to the industry, or someone who is really coming at Hollywood from a completely external standpoint. And yet you were someone who was close to both film and television for many years. And I thought I'd start by asking how you think that might have affected the work you did do in feature filmmaking.
Well, I think I worked my way up. The years that I did television and industrial films, I started in Kansas City actually doing industrial films and documentary films. It was really learning the tools. I think if you're going to be a painter, you better understand how to mix your paint and how to make a brush and how to stretch your pajamas onto a piece of board and make a canvas out of it. And that's basically what all that time was doing. It was a great experimental time for me, and I didn't know I was learning anything, of course, because you don't learn things when you know you're learning them. But in retrospect, it was a great time.
When you were picking up these various crafts, was it a situation where you did the whole range of activities?
Well, it did. You did everything. I wasn't a cameraman. I remember when the first Hitchcock I directed, which was probably the first kind of real professional piece of work I did on those half-hour Hitchcock shows. And I got on the set, and the cameraman was Curly Linden, who was a rather famous cameraman, movies, and he was now in television. He was an old guy. And I said, okay, let's do this and this and this. And he says, yeah, what lens have you got on? And I said, what do you mean? He says, you can't have the telephone in the same shot and in focus with Joe Cotton there. You got to either take your pick. You can't have them both. So I said, oh, I'm sorry, sir. And and I started doing what these guys would tell me. They kept telling me what I couldn't do. And I thought, something's wrong here. And I kind of went out and found out what I couldn't do and then figured out a way to do it. I finally went and I spent about a year learning still photography and how to deal with stills and develop and print and because the movies are just a series of stills. But all of that information is sound the same way. I remember the first time they had a boom, a sound boom, with the microphone at the end of it in Kansas City at this industrial film company. And there was a booth upstairs in the glass. The engineer was a crotchety old guy who would sit up there and would say, okay, we're ready to do this scene. And he would slowly wander down onto the set, and he'd get up on this boom, which was meant so you could move it and track to people. And he would take it out and he'd move it out and send it into the center of the actors that I had, and he'd go back upstairs and say, and now talk louder. And I said, can't we move the microphone to the person that's talking? He said, who's going to do that? You? And I said, yeah. So I got up, and I remember I directed that first film, and I directed the whole thing from the mic boom, and I was... But mainly it's just, it was a great school.
So that when you moved to making features like Countdown and That Cool Day in the Park and MASH, which we'll see a clip from in a minute, did you feel a sense that you really had learned what you needed to launch yourself into the industry?
No, but I had, in fact, learned a lot.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should take a look. What we have for you is actually the last sequence, or the tail end of the last sequence from MASH, which Bob has actually wanted us to show for this particular event, partly because, for reasons I think you'll elucidate towards the end, partly because it evokes the ending of The Player. In fact, The Player is a kind of reworking of the ending of MASH, he tells us.
The actual, in The Player, I don't know if you people have seen The Player or not, have you?
Go ahead. Only the people who sit up front.
But we didn't have any ending for it. There was no ending in the script, and and Tim Robbins and I were sitting around trying about a week before we actually started shooting, and we were coming up with all these endings, and nothing was satisfactory for us. And I said, God, I know it'll come to us. I said, when I was doing MASH, and this is after I had shot the film, I didn't have an ending for it. And I remember the exact moment I was driving home and turning into my driveway, and this idea hit me about how to end MASH. And I told Tim what it was, and we talked a little bit more, and about 5 minutes later he says, why don't we do that? I said, do what? He says, what you did in MASH, why don't we do the same thing on the player? And I said, oh. So I lifted the ending of MASH, and that's why I wanted them to show this to you, because it is literally the ending of the player.
Okay, should we take a look at it? So that device of using the loudspeaker with its repeated announcements through the film and it sort of gave you the idea for this final wrap-up of the cast?
The loudspeaker, all that was added after I shot the film. I shot those speakers because I knew I needed some punctuation of some kind. I knew I was going to get in trouble. And so I don't know if you remember the film MASH, but we went all through it. You would occasionally hear them announcing tonight's film will be Johnny Comes Marching Home, and all these films they made during the war. And at the end of the picture, we said, the film you have just seen is the film you're about to see, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And in the player, actually, we turned that right back into it, that the player, what the writer pitches is the movie you just saw.
The other thing that this sequence brings out, I think, really acutely is the ensemble nature of most of your films. I think this may be the first film where at least most people in the audience began to realize that you were, in a sense, making a film, just stuffing it with characters, some of which got a lot of development, some of which are peripheral, but still have a certain sharpness to them.
Well, we just took the extras, the people that you have to have around, because if they're not around, it doesn't look right. And instead of just having them bodies in nondescript walking, we just gave them all a personality and put actors in that could do that and let it kind of develop so there was a real life that you sensed that. Plus, that the people the stars were, main text was in that whole really happening, actually.
And many of these people you'd use in other films, I think, yeah?
Oh, a lot of them.
Michael Murphy and René Auberjonois.
Big bunch of them. Well, you work with some actor in a film, and then the next film comes along, and it's automatically my mind goes to them in casting, and you think, that so-and-so could do that. And also, as directing a film, I learned what the range of the actor is, where you as an audience might see a guy who's playing a cop, and you say, he plays cops. But I know that he's got what range he has, and so in the next film I can say, Murphy could play the politician, or Murphy could play this, and because I've had the experience with him. So that's why I think all that ensemble happens. It's not uncommon. I mean, Bergman has always worked that way, and most film directors.
Kind of a repertory company that they can go back to. But it's interesting that you mentioned the fact that you can kind of, in a sense, promote yours, because people like Burt Remsen or Paul Dooley become very important central figures in your films, and they might be more in the background than some of the earlier work you did.
Well, that happened a lot. Shelley Duvall,
in another case. One of the other things you mentioned about having all these peripheral characters is that this seems to be the first film, I think, also that where your characteristic techniques of handling the sound and the dialogue sort of come to the fore, and that might be related to this issue of having these characters floating around the sidelines.
Well, yeah, eventually we had to we went, I think in California Split, we went to an actual 8-track recording system, so that everybody has a microphone. And because when I first got into this business and doing television, I'd go on and the actors would play the scene, and suddenly in the middle of it, I'm watching the scene, in the middle of it, the sound man would say, "Cut," and I'd, "Cut? Why? Why are you saying cut?" And he'd say, "They overlapped." I said, "What do you mean they overlapped?" He said, "Well, I mean, David talked when stepped on Bob's last line." I said, "Well, I don't care about that." He said, "Well, you can't hear it." And so the actors now, instead of being able to play a scene, are sitting there waiting for cues, and the editors cut it. And I think there's something wrong with this system. So we finally just put microphones on everybody. If he overlaps me, in fact, when I go to the final mix, I can raise his voice and lower mine, which is very inventive. They've been doing it in music for ever since they've been recording. And to this day, that was 20 years ago, I would imagine, and to this day, nobody uses an 8-track sound system except me. I have no idea why they don't. They do it when they have a certain big scenes, but they don't do it because they think it's more expensive, which it is not. And but mainly it isn't a habit. It isn't in their habit, and they do not try new things because they're so intent upon making a product that they think will market well. They've gone out and you audience, you people, have brought this on yourself by making successes of films. So they've decided that all you want to see are those films, or films like those films. Because you can't answer them when they say, what kind of films do you really want to see? Because the real answer is, you all want to say, I want to see something I've never seen before. But you can't say that because it isn't on their questionnaire. So they keep recycling the films that you've liked before. And you say, oh, I liked that before. That'll be good next time. Let's go see that again. But pretty soon the ink gets a little faded. And, you don't bother to show up. And then these guys says, what are we going to do now? So then they have to go find some artist that's working out in the garbage and pull him in and say, make another one for us so we can copy that.
It's interesting you raised that because as you were making your films of the 70s, there was a sense that you were kind of taking on each American genre one by one and kind of giving them definitely what they did not want, or at least what they had never seen before. You have your war film that's kind of half serious and gruesome action, more gruesome than in most war films, and half sort of frat house comedy. And then the same thing with McCabe and as a kind of very unusual Western and so forth. And were you consciously doing that sort of thing of saying, you want this, I'm going to give you something that's a little like this, but more my own kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the McCabe and Mrs. Miller, the story, I said, fine. It was one of the worst Western stories you've ever heard. I mean, it had all the cliches. I mean, this guy was a gambler, and she was the whore with the heart of gold, and the three heavies were the giant and the half-breed and the kid. And so I said, you want to make this film again? So I said, okay. And then I tried to think, well, what may it have really looked like? I don't know that that's what it was really like, but I started with the wardrobe on McCabe. I said, these guys that wear these great big hats and these handkerchiefs around their neck and all these pictures, they all dress the same. I don't think people dress that way. So they would come out and they'd say, here's the photographic book, and here's the book of the photographs, actual photograph of that time. And there's, of course, a photograph of a guy with a great big hat. And I said, who took this photograph? They said, well, the photographer. I said, well, what was the photography then? Well, they had glass plates. How much did they cost? They said, well, it cost about $2 a plate to make a negative. I said, Well, I said, take this then. Suppose we're all sitting around in this town and we're in our derbies or in our hats that we wore when we came over from Europe, and some guy comes rushing in and says, get your camera and get out there. There's some guy with a great big hat. So he runs out there and he takes a picture of the hat. It goes in the book. 100 years later, we're saying all these people wore these big hats. So that was just and they said, did everybody talk with it like they're from Texas? I said, it took a long time to have the English language, to disintegrate to that. Well, most of them had Italian accents or French accents or Irish accents or Swedish accents, or because this country was mainly made up at that time of Northern Europeans and then the people they killed to make the space for us.
So this is a great segue into our next clip, actually. What we have now is an extract from an early portion of McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and maybe we should show that to you now. One of the things you mentioned about the photography of the period, were you trying? Print is pretty badly faded, I'm afraid, but were you trying to get that sort of amber glow you sometimes get?
Well, yeah, I was trying to make the whole, to give the antiquity of it by really making the print itself look faded. I mean, that was part of the idea. The clothes that they were wearing, we mentioned that. I just saw Rene Aubergine there. I had all the actors that comprised the townspeople there, and we had them all up there a couple of weeks early, and they actually, many of them helped work on the set, and this Sheehan's saloon became a place where at the end of work everybody would go there. And they had a still, which I did finally shut down because I was afraid somebody would go blind. And it became a little kind of funny community, and all these actors, and of course this was shot in 1971, I think, and so hippiedom was really popular then, and these guys loved to grow beards and live in tents. I remember the morning we made the first shot, which was the opening shot of the picture, and we went over to the edge of Presbyterian Church, the name of the town, and there were these little smaller tents. And these guys who worked there and were in the film actually lived in those places. And Vilmos Zsigmond, who was the cameraman, and we got out there and it was 5:30 in the morning, and of course it was raining, and I take him out to the edge of the town. I said, now we'll have McCabe come up on this horse riding up this way, and maybe we shoot this way. And while we're talking, I hear rumblings in the tent, and I turn around and somebody is backing out of the tent. Only the somebody was a woman in a miniskirt, and it was red. And this girl backs out of the tent, and she had shiny black boots on and a little jacket in her coat, and she was leaving to go to work. She worked in the bank. And she happened to be living with this guy who was one of our carpenters. And here I saw this. So the town became very real. But we got all the wardrobe. I went to Warner Brothers and I said, I just got tons of wardrobe from that period. And we brought it up there and hung it all out inside of the Sheehan's saloon. And I told the actors, I said, all of you go in there and pick out your clothes. Pick out what you're going to wear in the movie. I said, you can have one pair of pants, you can have two shirts, you can have one jacket, you can have one sweater or vest, you can just pick out, and a hat, and pick your own stuff out, and that's what you wear for the whole picture. So they all went in there and they picked their stuff out, and of course, being actors, Rene Aubergine especially came out, and he had all this jacket that was torn, and they all picked out the raggedy, the worst looking stuff, because that would give their character more character. And I remember gathering everybody around. I said, okay, you all got your wardrobe? And they said, yes. And I said, okay, now the sewing kits are over here. Now you sew up all the holes in them, you darn them, because you will freeze up here with clothes like that. People did not walk around with torn. So for 3 days, all these actors are sitting around sewing up their clothes. So eventually we got a look that I felt was closer to the sense of reality.
Mm-hmm. When McCabe came out, I think it was seen very often as part of a kind of cycle of revisionist westerns. Peckinpah had made The Wild Bunch 3 years before, and there were other films at the time that were turning the western myths upside down and saying there's this gritty West with prostitution and exploitation and so on. What do you think might have distinguished McCabe and has made it last in a way that some of those other films have not?
I don't know. Probably the simplicity of the terrible story. That it was like most of our fairy tales and stories we remember are they're very basic. The basic story didn't have much nuance in it.
But what you do in the film, I think, is quite interesting, is you sort of set into play a kind of disintegration of this character's sort of status in the community. He comes in and everyone greets him with awe. He's regarded as this sort of amazing person from another place who's going to become quite the entrepreneur for the whole town. Then as the movie goes on and it's revealed in his dealings with the big company and his dealings with the Julie Christie character, Mrs. Miller, that he really doesn't know what he's doing. He's an entrepreneur who doesn't really seem to be very skillful at this. And the audience's relation, I think, changes to him in an interesting way. He's less of a classical sort of hero in the sense of the gambler hero maybe, but more of an interesting and sympathetic character. And finally, at the end, when he tries to act like a hero and shoot it out with the bad guys, and he succeeds.
Well, you find out that he was all reputation, and he didn't really know how to do those things. But we do that every day. Take George Bush, for instance.
You also said something today, and it goes back to the player about unhappy endings. And I think, by the canon of the traditional Western, that McCabe doesn't have a happy ending. And you say a little bit about why you like that option. It does set you off, I think, from the mainstream industry.
Well, in first place, I don't know of any ending, really, except death. And that's the only ending I know. Everything else is a stopping place. And so in a film, they say, we got to have a happy ending. We want those people to walk out feeling good. It's not an ending, it's a stopping place. And going back to the player, we said the player has a happy ending. Well, if you take the Griffin Mill ending, where he's going home to his house with all the flowers and he's the head of the studio and life is sweet, it seems to me also is walking in that house without a soul. I don't think that's particularly happy. But if you're following the Bonnie Chereau story in that, the girl that was his first girlfriend, and the story editor, she's sitting on the steps crying her eyes out, and you say, gee, that's an unhappy ending. So which do you want? Do you want the unhappy ending or the happy ending? And then on the other hand, maybe hers is the happiest ending because it seems to me she was so destroyed that she probably got out of the business. So these are all kind of false things, and I try to allow the audience to take what I think is interesting, because how dare I show you something that I don't think is interesting, but somebody's going to think you're going to think it's interesting, and so I don't know about happy endings.
It's an interesting connection with MASH, just to go back for a minute, how that became such a successful television series, predicated on kind of shifting the tone of the movie itself. Do you have any feelings about how that sort of... There we have a case where an original work is sort of reworked to give it a more buoyant or upbeat quality.
Well, I have never seen one of the MASH episodes, any of them, all the way through. I obviously couldn't miss them switching by the television. I mean, they're on some channel always. But I thought that the television series of MASH was the exact opposite of what the film of MASH was. I was talking about a war, the Vietnam War, and my idea was to make people laugh till they wet their pants, walk out of the theater, and then have them suddenly say, wait a minute, what am I laughing at? And it's this thing of making people pay for their laughs. When you laugh at somebody or something, you got to pay for it. And when they did the television series, I'm sure they were well done and well produced and professional and all that, but they had their kind of irreverent jokes about the establishment and etc. But what they really did was bring an Asian war into your living room every Sunday, and its presence was there until it became subtle. You just accepted that, and for 12 years. And in that war, no matter what they said on the screen, The bad guys were the people whose eyes were a little more slanted than yours, and their skin was a little darker. So I think it was morally irresponsible to do that kind of.
MASH and McCabe are, of course, only two of the number of films you made in the 70s. In fact, by my count, between 1970 and 1980, you made 14 features, which is not only amazing for that decade, but amazing even for any other decade. And I'm wondering to what extent you, before we move on and talk a little about Nashville, films like Brewster McCloud, Images, Long Goodbye, Thieves Like Us, California Split, do you have any sort of long-distance reflections on any one of those films or set of those films?
Well, each one of them, was like a complete a chapter for me. It's almost a complete lifetime. Each one of them had a beginning, a middle, and an end. A new group of friends and enemies, new experiences, and it was almost like a complete cycle, which is what makes this business or whatever it is I think so exciting. I think I'm very lucky to have had that kind of to be able to have that kind of life. And every one of those films was started with a caprice of some kind. It was just an idea. Maybe it was something someone would let me make. Maybe it was something that I got kind of stubborn about wanting to make. But they're all just ideas, and eventually they're put into this particular art form. And they all have to me they mean special things. I mean,
when you were making them so rapidly, was it partly because you were able to keep the cast, the crew, the technicians? And
fear of being out of work. I wanted to get as much done as I could before they caught me.
Well, I don't think they exactly caught you on Nashville, but I think that for a lot of people, that's the prototypical Altman film. Some people might prefer other films, but I think most people identify you as the director of Nashville.
That was my second comeback.
Then, yeah, cover of Time or Newsweek, and enormous coverage before the film came out, very much like The Player, in fact. Let me just ask you some very obvious questions about that. Why so many characters? Why did you decide to sort of take that jump and multiply the number of... Actually, there is, in a sense, no protagonist in the film. Everybody is equally interesting.
Well, that idea of that kind of film intrigued me and had for a long time, rather than just following one story. I keep thinking when somebody crosses the street and we're watching their story, what happens to the person that's going the other way? Don't they have a story? And this idea of it really started with a film I never did make but wanted to make. I titled it Chicago, Chicago, and I had 4 couples in it. And my idea was that you would see you'd start following the story of this one couple, and they would get out of a taxi cab and go into the Ambassador Hotel and the revolving door, but the camera would get stuck outside, and then coming out the other way in the revolving door would be somebody else, and the camera would just follow them. And then it would take you onto their story, and then somehow it would bring you back to the other. And when we did Nashville, Joan Tewksbury, who had written Thieves Like Us, had done the screenplay for me, we got down to Mississippi, and I had made a deal with United Artists. They did not want to make Thieves Like Us, and I wanted to make it, and they wouldn't give me the money. They wanted me to make a film about country western music because they had just bought a record company. And so I finally said, okay, if you do Thieves Like Us, I'll make a country western picture for you. And I had never been to Nashville. So I sent Joan Tewksbury while we were down getting ready to shoot Thieves Like Us. I said, go to Nashville and keep a diary. So she got on a plane, and she'd never been to Nashville. So I sent her up there, and she got off the airplane, and the first thing she did was get into a taxi cab or a car to go into town, and there was a wreck on the freeway, and she was stuck in that wreck for 3 hours. And that's where we opened Nashville. And she went around from place to place, and she just kept notes. And we came back, and she said, "I don't know which one of these stories to do." And I said, "Let's do them all." So that's really how that film evolved.
Maybe this would be a good time. It's impossible really to capture that texture you're talking about, these interwoven lines, but we've tried it a little bit to get some sense of that with the extract that comes from the first reel of the film. So why don't we take a look at it? There's so many things to talk about in that segment. I don't know if we can even do justice to it, but I'll try. First is in the player, one of the things that people have noticed, I think, is that there's almost a secondary level to the movie called Spot the Star, where people are walking in and out of the background. Oh, Julia Roberts is glimpsed in one corner, whatever. Yet you're doing it in a way here, but spot the future star. I think if you went through this sequence, you could just pull out all these people who were not so well known then, like Jeff Goldblum or Scott Glenn, and then who are familiar faces today. But one of the things that struck me is that, watching this again, is how you were talking about earlier about the mixing of the stories, but also the mixing of tones, because you've got Mr. Green, who's there very seriously, and you've got, for a very serious purpose because his wife is ill, and at the same time you've got the satire going on with the Haven Hamilton character and part of the whole Nashville glamour. That mixing of tones seems really characteristic of your work. I mean,
well, I think that's a way of doing it where you get little pieces. We don't need to go through hours and hours of soap opera stories. We see things and we get them right away because we know the stories and we make them up ourselves. The audience completes the movie, and so you just have to see for a moment. The big problem we had in Nashville when we shot this in 1974, I think it was that I had no control over the wardrobe I couldn't call and say, "All right, everybody in Nashville, don't wear red tomorrow." So I couldn't color coordinate the thing. I also found that we had to dress our people really down for them to stand out. Now, granted, Shelley Duvall was a little extreme, but if I turned the camera the other way, you'd see six people that were as outrageous as she was.
There's also a sense, I think, when, for instance, one of the things, the most interesting things about this clip and the movie as a whole is that although you're willing to follow the stories of everybody who's involved with the Hal Philip Walker presidential campaign, or the various people who are in the Nashville music scene, we never see Hal Philip Walker himself, the presidential candidate who's invisible.
Well, isn't that the way it is? These guys would do a lot better if they remained more invisible.
And what about TV? I mean, we're going to see that again and again tonight, especially a couple clips from now. But the satire or the parody you address to movies and things like MASH and in the player seems to be turned on television and the media in general in Nashville, record industry. Your film begins with a fake promo for the album, the soundtrack album from the movie you're about to see. And throughout the movie you get...
I think I've kind of done this always, and I don't know why, but it seems to me that this is a movie, this isn't real. It's the illusion of reality, and I keep wanting to remind you that the medium that you're looking at, because you got to remember that you really are completing the film. When this thing gets put back in the can and goes up on the shelf, it doesn't move. It doesn't exist. It has no life whatsoever. It's in the dark. It's only your information that you bring and meet the screen halfway. And so I'm constantly reminding you of that. It's not unlike a painter that they did especially during the 60s and early 70s. They started sticking their brushes onto the canvas to say, this is a painting. And so it's just constantly reminding you of the medium.
And as Pauline Kael, I think, pointed out at the time, with you it's almost action painting. There's a sense that the movie is being, if not made up at the moment you watch it, there's a sense that you're capturing...
Well, the movie is being made up as I shoot it. I mean, it really is. I mean, what we do is we create an event. I think what I do is mostly do documentary films with fictional people. So I get a bunch of people, and I say, okay, you're all these people, now act like those people. And then I run around and try to shoot them doing that. Many of them try to shoot me afterwards.
So that would lead naturally into our asking how you work with actors. Your famous actors love you because you do, as one of the promo pieces we have says, when you give a bad performance in an Altman film, you know it's your fault, not his.
Well, I think it's very simple. I insist that the actors do what I'm paying them to do, and that is to bring life to the characters they're playing. I do not bring them in and have them try to emulate something that I have very clearly in my mind, because then we're limited to the imagination of one person. And I think that if any movie I've made would have come out, if it finished, just the way I saw it, it would be a pretty lousy movie. And so when I see these people doing this, it's a sense of discovery with me as well. So I'm saying, wow, look at that behavior. And I'm much more interested in that than I am something that I have in my mind, which only could be a copy of something I've seen before.
So this connects up with things like in Nashville, having the actors write their own songs.
Absolutely. Why not? This wasn't about good songs. This was about songs. Most of the songs that come out of Nashville are pretty bad. So what do I want to do? Buy one of their bad songs, or it's cheaper to use one of my own? And the actors feel better because they got their song out there, and they can find out how bad it really is.
It seems also to have an effect on the way you shoot the movie, too, because the movies have a really loose and fluid quality to them, a kind of floating around, picking out this bit of action, that little bit of action. To what extent is a movie like Nashville, if it is this sort of documentary of a fiction, as you suggest, then the editing plays a really important part for you, obviously. You're going to be weeding out
the editing is the structure of probably the most important part of any film. It's one part. But what I'm shooting a film, I think what I'm doing is gathering raw material. And then when I edit it, I'm using that raw material and putting it together and making it a form. The editing process in the film is exactly the same as the rehearsal process in theater. In theater, you rehearse and you make changes and that until you finally got it as good as you can get it, or they tell you we have to open tonight. And so that's the editing process. Editing is rehearsal. In film, I just said that, didn't I?
You went even farther in A Wedding, where you had more characters and more condensed time span, but to my way of thinking, more of a tighter plot, in a sense.
Well, yeah, but I had 50 people as opposed to 24 in this, but in A Wedding, I had them in a tighter space. Mm-hmm. We had them contained more, so they were pressed together, and they were forced. There wasn't anybody in A Wedding that wasn't a character in the thing. As a matter of fact, if you want to go star-looking, like they say that we're doing in The Player, in A Wedding, it was when Steppenwolf in Chicago had just started, and all of the people in A Wedding who were the waiters and the servants, the caterers in the house, were all members of Steppenwolf, and John Malkovich and Gary Sinise, and many of those people, Glenn Headley, and they all worked as extras.
One of the things you're editing in Nashville, I think, really brings out is how when the characters aren't in the same space as in the airport scene we just saw, but are in different spaces, say on Sunday morning when they're in various churches or whatever, the editing really brings out an interesting set of parallels among them, even when they're not in the same area or not interacting with each other. So there's a sense you really get of a kind of slice of the whole town, a kind of panoramic view of what's going on in the town, and obviously the editing structures that to a great
It's like doing a mural rather than a smaller painting. It's like a mural where everything's going on at the same time, and there's a sense of continuity. The Sunday morning sequence in Nashville tied all together because we went to 4 different churches, and so you knew there was still a connective tissue. It wasn't just going from one person to another without having some some connection in time.
The same thing with the scene that I think everyone remembers, the intercutting between Tom singing to the group in the music club and kind of seduce. Every woman in the audience thinks he's singing about her, but he's really trying to seduce Lily Tomlin sitting way in the back. And that scene being intercut with Gwen Wells' striptease at Ned Beatty's Smoker. And the way in which the two songs kind of invert one another. Tom's song is about how easy he is and how any woman can have him. She's doing the same thing, but in a way he's very aggressively pursuing Lily Tomlin, and the opposite situation is taking place where all the men are ogling Sue Ellen in the Smoker, and that kind of those kinds of resonances get built up through the editing in that film as much as through jamming the characters into the same scene.
Yeah, but that editing almost takes care of itself. I mean, if you have that material, it almost tells you when to do one thing and the other. I mean, it really dictates its own shape. I mean, it's like the film has a memory, a DNA memory, and it knows what elements it has and how to put them together.
There was a point, you were mentioning this again today, that there was a point at which apparently there was some thought of making Nashville a kind of miniseries, of taking a longer version and putting it on TV over 2 or 3 nights.
Well, that was simply ABC owned the television rights to it, and I said, there's enough material here, and they complained that they want to know first, can they cut it, because it was too long. Nashville was 2 hours and 45 minutes long. I mean, it was a long film. I'm no Kevin Costner, so. So,
would you have done things differently if it had been for TV, apart from editing out things maybe they might have found objectionable? Would you have?
No, it wasn't from that. It's just that I would have. But I said I can give you 2 hours. So I edited a longer version, which was so you could see it on Sunday night, and then the second half of it on Tuesday night or something like that. But that would not have been my choice, to make that long version for an audience to sit and look at one time.
It's strange thinking back on how adventurous a film this is 15, 17 years ago, and you see a film that there's a lot of stir about nowadays, like Slacker, where the filmmaker, working on even a smaller budget than you usually work on, follows several characters through the same overlapping system, but it's a much more simplified kind of structure. It's just one overlapping with another, and not this sort of kaleidoscope effect you get with this film.
Well, it was just an idea. That was the idea, Nixon or Secret Honor was an idea of having this one guy alone in the room and covering the territory. So.
Well, speaking of ideas, we wanted to move on to the idea behind Popeye, which was to make, as you pointed out at the time and have said since, a live-action cartoon.
Yeah,
you want to say more about that? I mean, we've had a lot of comic book movies since Superman.
Well, Popeye, Jules Feiffer, who wrote Popeye, his idea was, and what he wanted, and what I wanted, was to take the original cartoon of Popeye, the Cigar cartoon, and use that sensibility. Now, by that time, most people had known the cartoons in the movies. Popeye. And so we started out, if you ever look at Popeye again, and if you have children, I have grandchildren, they look at it, you'll see that it starts out very much becomes Popeye comes into this fictional place, this town, which is Cartoon Land, and he becomes... He's kind of stands out from those people, but by the time the picture's over, he's become one of them. He is a cartoon, and at the end, we go from the comic strip version, and we take it more into the animated version for that ending with the octopus and all those things. And we try to literally create two-dimensional people. I had 50 some odd actors on Malta. And we built, we were really isolated, so we had a big rehearsal hall, and I remember bringing every person that appears in that film in the town, they brought them in and we would rehearse. We called it pick a tick. And each actor, we could say, you're two-dimensional, so you can only do one thing. So if you want to say sneeze, and you want to be the character that sneezes all the time, you can only sneeze or not sneeze. But you can't also do other things. or if you're going to have a funny walk, then that's what you do. And because that's what cartoons are, they're two-dimensional. So we tried to take that, but we were sort of, Popeye was sort of sabotaged in a funny way by the studio that made it. They were disappointed in it. They wanted it to be more like Superman, I think.
Mm-hmm. But when you talk about this sort of, you also show the mechanics of the gags in a way. I mean, the special effects in the movie.
No,
are
I wouldn't
all out
use
there to see.
all the special effects are mechanical, and you see them just the way you see Jeff Goldblum in that. You can see what he's doing with the salt. In other words, I'm not trying to make this magic. I'm trying to let you see the mechanics of the special effects because they're simpler and they're more childlike.
Did you attempt that with the musical numbers too? Because the musical numbers in the film are handled in a very unusual way, I think, for a musical. They're much more fragmentary, and the characters are striking postures, and then there's this kind of lightning cut or a transition to them in another posture.
Well, I still was going back to this thing that you see when you see a strip. You see a picture here, a next picture, and it's progressed. So instead of having a smooth visual transition, we did a lot of cutting in that, and yet I didn't want to make it look obvious like that. It's almost meant to be subliminal.
Well, we'll see how subliminal it is. We have an extract from Popeye now, one of the musical numbers, the one featuring an actress we've already seen as L.A. Joan, Shelley Duvall. So if Robin Williams was born to play Popeye, she was born to play Olive Oil.
Oh, yes. Yes, she was Olive Oil. No question about that.
It reminds me of another film that came out at about the same time, Milos Forman's Hair, where you get the same sense that the dances are just sort of very gradual transitions from ordinary movement. That this isn't really featuring a kind of flashy show tune or even a choreographed number so much as it is certain postures that she strikes and moments where she pauses and then a kind of natural transition to the next image.
But the whole film is that way, and the non-musical parts of it were the same thing. There was never an attempt to make it look like reality. Now we tried to set that in a setting that was not real, but was real. In other words, you saw the real decay. The town in Popeye, Sweet Haven, was designed after Presbyterian Church in McCabe, Mrs. Miller. There's the church up there is exactly the same design as the church. All those buildings, we gave it that real old antique patinaed look. And Bob Fortier, who played in McCabe, played the town drunk, the guy in the clip you just saw. He had the sailor hat on, that black sailor hat, and that McCabe gave him his drink to. And he's the one that, if you remember McCabe, he did that dance on the ice. He was in Popeye as one of the townspeople in the same wardrobe, and was the same guy as if he was the drunk in that one. And nobody picked that up. No critics talked about that. But
again, looking back on it, that idea of making the town look dilapidated is something that, of course, now is a convention in films after Blade Runner, and of course with Batman, the idea that the future is going to be a wreck. Everything's going to decay. But here, it's part of that sort of cartoon mystique. It works, it seems to me. Mm-hmm. Well, let me sort of move us on to our next extract, and which is from Secret Honor. You made it in an unusual way. You made it on 16 millimeter, which is usually not considered the quote professional gauge, and you made it in the Midwest, in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Yeah.
Well, I when Secret Honor came about, I had a friend of mine suggested I see this play that was being done in California. And I went out and saw it it was in a workshop situation, and I saw it with 20 other people in the room, and I said, this is a terrific piece of material. I took it to Broadway, to New York, and I produced the play off Broadway. And we ran about, 30, 40 performances. It was not wildly successful. And it stayed with me, and I thought, I want to make a film out of this. Well, nobody would do it. So I financed this myself, which is one reason why it was done the way it was. And I teach occasionally at the University of Michigan, And they've always been very generous with me, and they encourage me to bring things to them that we can involve the students in. So I said, here's what we'll do. We'll make a film. You can make a course out of it. I'll bring the play there. We ran the play for 5 performances, so anybody interested could go and actually see it on the stage. While we were doing that, we were building a set, dressing a set in one of the residences buildings. We used all students, graduate students, as our crew. I had a cameraman and my sound engineer, but basically everybody was a student. I taught a course, I lectured, and we talked about the play and the process of the film, and it became an actual accredited course. And out of that, they would go to the dailies, and actually in the set we put a video camera so that students just generally on the campus could come by and sit in another room and actually watch what was happening for these 7 days it took to shoot this. So to me, that seemed a good thing. I mean, we were educating. The film was being made, and I still think it's a good thing. I think more of it should and can be done. These films that we see all the time, they don't have to be as professional as they are. They don't have to be. Everything has to be the millions and millions of dollars of sets, and everything has to be perfect. I mean, I think that's wrong, really. And I think more films like this should be made. Unfortunately, this kind of film was only made by people who are starting for the first time, or by John Cassavetes. And unfortunately, John, who was the true independent filmmaker, he got his time cut short. It was an unhappy ending.
Well, why don't we take a look at this, because I think we'll have some questions for you after we see this. This is from, again, early in the film, as Nixon is about to dictate his case to a tape recorder. We talked earlier about the mixtures of tone. There's a real pendulum swing throughout this whole movie between really bitter, sour sarcasm addressed to Nixon in his portrayal, but then a poignancy too. It seems to rocket back and forth.
Well, again, you have to have both things. This is a case where the editing was done in the rehearsal. In other words, the actor. This was a performance, and Philip Baker Hall. It's a Shakespearean performance. It's a great performance, and all we did was film it. I mean, but this had been. This is not like setting the actors in an arena and me capturing it. This is a real performance piece, and it's a great job by him.
It's a spectacular performance. But I'm wondering, were the video monitors in the play as well?
No.
That seems an important.
Well, I added that at the very day before we shot, because I just was suddenly trapped. I thought, I've got this thing here, but I don't have anybody to cut away to. I have no way to truncate it. And actually, the students at Michigan set that video thing up overnight, and it was a last-minute
It works
decision.
really well, of course, in the film. He keeps going back to that, and it's at times he's, as in this scene, addressing it, using it as a kind of surrogate for addressing the nation, and at other times it's almost a sense that he's completely closed in on himself. He's taken all these video surveillance cameras and trained them on this study.
Well, we had a problem. We had a problem of that we have one man talking for 90 minutes, and how do you keep from getting monotonous? And so we did everything we could.
The photo is the same kind of thing, the coverage, the extra stuff to cut away to, and
always looking for something to cut away through. Man, a film like Nashville is duck soup, because I've got so many stories going. If one becomes boring, I just cut away from it and go to another one. Here, I couldn't do that.
What about the subject itself? You mentioned it.
Well,
were you on the enemies list by any chance? I don't think
well,
so.
I wasn't that important, but I had kind of gone after Nixon. I was not an admirer of Nixon then, and Brewster McCloud. I think we took some terrible, really vicious swipes at he and Agnew, and it became kind of a standard thing with me. I'm very outspoken, and I hold Richard Nixon responsible for a lot that's wrong, I think is wrong with this country. Nixon, as is pointed out in this play, he answered an ad. He was just getting mustered out of the Navy, and it was an ad in the Whittier paper saying wanted a young man to run for Congress, veteran preferred, and he answered that ad, and they took him up, and so he was hired, and went further than they thought he was, but he was very ruthless about what he did, and anyway, he was not a friend. But a few years later, Kissinger gets it pretty good in this play too. In fact, he really gets it. And so one year, suddenly, years later, I'm in California, and I was living there at the time, and a package came, and it was a book, a very thick book, and a gift from a publisher, and it was Leaders, the book that Nixon had written. And why I'm on the publisher's list, I don't know, and why I'm on Nixon, I don't know. But I opened the book up, and it's signed. It says, "To Robert Altman, thank you for your years of loyal support, Richard Nixon." So now, we really do face dilemmas in our life. I said, now I got to burn a book. I'm going to die, and they're going to go through my book. They're going to say, "Oh, so really? Altman was a big Nixon supporter." So he was either very, very smart. Anyway, I kept putting the book where it would rain on it, and but I didn't have the heart to burn a book. But that was happened. Then later, I got another letter after Nashville. I got a letter from years after Nashville, after that book and after this. And I don't know if he's ever seen it, but I know that he's certainly heard about it. And I got a letter from him. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it says, "Dear Robert, Nashville is my daughter Julie's favorite film, and I wondered, I've never seen it, but I wondered if it was available on video, on cassette, so I can see it. Don't bother yourself with this. Just have your secretary take care of this. Thank you, Richard Nixon." Well, I didn't have a secretary. So I wrote him back on the typewriter. I said, "Dear Mr. Nixon, yes, Nashville is available on video. You can get it at your local video stores. It's in two cases, and it is $79.89. And I said, "Thank you, Phyllis, the secretary to Mr. Altman." I think the guy was just trying to hustle me out of a free tape. But as I say, the story never ends. That's not the happy ending. The story never ends because 3 weeks ago, when the Player opened and we started getting so much press, we've just had an extraordinary amount of press for the Player. I don't really know how to account for it. And when that happens, there are certain journalists that I know I'm suddenly going to get a backlash. Somebody's going to strike out against it. In the New York Observer, an article came out. This is before the film was opened or before reviews came out, but there was a lot of talk about making the film. And there was an article in the New York Observer that was a terrible article toward me. This guy chastised me for biting the hand that fed me, for attacking the people that have served me so well. And yet he kept saying the film is pretty good, however. So he wasn't attacking the film, he was attacking me, and I couldn't figure it out. And I looked at who had wrote it, the byline, and it was David Kissinger. And I said, "David Kissinger." I said, who's David Kissinger? And he said, "That's Henry Kissinger's son." I said, "Oh, motives." So I wrote him a letter. I said, "Dear David Kissinger, you seem to be so interested in my penchant for going against the establishment, and you seem to want to write about it." I said, "I made another film a few years ago called Secret Honor,
if you would like to write about that, I would be happy to send you a copy. But I haven't heard from him yet.
Well, you made so many estimable films, we can't by any means do a justice to them in this space. So since you mentioned The Player, I think we should at least give some chance to talk a bit more about that. So we have a clip from that as our final clip, and we should just look at it probably. Any last words on that subject?
No Hollywood endings.
I'm afraid we have to stop there because we have to close up the room, but we could also express our admiration for that film and many others by giving Mr. Altman a clap.
Thank you all very much.